Please, I just want to meet your family.
You don't understand, it's complicated.
We are married. They are my family too.
I'm just trying to protect us.
Why are you keeping them from me? I deserve to meet your family.
It is just complicated.
Who are these people?
I can explain everything.
My husband refused to let me meet his family. The reason left me speechless. My husband had a mother. My husband had brothers. My husband had a compound somewhere in this same Nigeria with a gate and a name and a history, and after 7 years of marriage, I had never once stood inside it. Not for Christmas, not for New Year, not even the day my son was born, when every other woman in the maternity ward had a mother-in-law pressing pepper soup into her hands. I had nobody. And when I finally found out why my husband, Kelechi Unwosu, had kept his family locked away from me like a room he was ashamed of, I did not know whether to hold him or to leave him. Before you keep watching, subscribe to this channel because the ending of this story is not the one you are already predicting in your head. Stay with me. My name is Chiamaka. I met Kelechi in Lagos at a wedding I almost did not attend. I remember the exact moment. He was standing by the drinks table in a blue kaftan, laughing at something with his head thrown back, and I thought, this is a man who is not hiding anything. I was wrong, but I did not know that yet. He asked for my number before the small chops finished going round, and by the time the couple was cutting their cake, we had already exchanged 3 text messages that had nothing to do with the wedding and everything to do with each other. Kelechi was gentle in a way that Lagos men are not supposed to be. He remembered small things, that I did not like too much pepper, that I hated when people chewed loudly, that my father had passed when I was 19 and it still hurt me every October. He built himself into my life carefully, the way a man builds a house he intends to live in for a long time. 6 months in, he was already meeting my mother in Enugu, sitting on her small veranda, eating her overcooked jollof rice like it was the best thing he had tasted, and my mother, God rest her hard-to-please soul, liked him immediately. This one is serious, she told me, wagging her finger the way she meant it. Don't lose him. I did not lose him. 10 months after that wedding where we met, Kelechi proposed. 14 months after that, we were married. A small court wedding followed by a traditional ceremony that, now that I look back on it, was strange in a way I did not question at the time. Because on my traditional wedding day, the day every Igbo woman waits for, the day the men from the groom's family are supposed to come with their kola nut and their gin and their proverbs, sitting my father's people down to negotiate for me the proper way, on that day, only 2 people came from Kelechi's side. 2. An uncle who introduced himself as Uncle Nkena, and a family friend called Mazi Okonkwo who did most of the talking. There was no mother, there was no father. Kelechi had told me his father died when he was in secondary school, so I understood that. But there was no mother. No brothers, even though Kelechi had mentioned in passing early in our relationship that he had 2 younger brothers. No aunties dancing and rubbing money on my face, no cousins taking pictures, just 2 men, a bag of kola nut, and an envelope of money that Uncle Nkena handed over almost too quickly, as if he wanted the whole event to finish before anyone could ask too many questions. I asked Kelechi about it that night, lying beside him in the hotel room we had booked for our wedding night, still smelling of coconut oil and camwood. "Where is your mother? Why didn't she come?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mother does not travel well. Her health is not good. She sent her blessing." I accepted it. What choice did I have? I was a new wife, drunk on happiness, and a woman drunk on happiness does not interrogate the small cracks in the foundation. She simply moves in. My mother, before she died 2 years into my marriage, used to tell me something that I did not understand fully until much later. She said, "A man who has hidden one room from you has usually hidden a whole floor. You just haven't found the staircase yet." I laughed at her then, told her she was being dramatic, that not every man was hiding a flaw, that some men simply had complicated families and nothing more. She only shook her head and continued peeling her ube, unconvinced, the way mothers are unconvinced when they have lived long enough to see the pattern their daughters have not yet learned to see. There were other small things too, things I did not think to add together until they had already become a mountain. In our first year of marriage, I suggested, gently, that we travel to see his mother, wherever she was. Kelechi said his mother was in the village, in a place called Amudo, deep in the interior of Imo State, and that the roads there were terrible, and that his mother's health made visitors difficult for her, and that we would go soon. Soon meant not now. Soon meant maybe never. Soon was the door Kelechi kept slightly open, just enough that I could not accuse him of shutting it completely. In our second year, I asked again, and this time I asked harder. I told him I was tired of celebrating Christmas with only the two of us, tired of being the only woman I know whose husband had blood relatives she had never once laid eyes on. He said his brothers had issues with him, that there had been a disagreement over their late father's affairs, something about inheritance, and that things were complicated. I did not fully believe him, but I let it rest, because pressing him always ended the same way, his jaw tightening, his voice dropping into that flat, closed tone that told me the conversation was over whether I agreed or not. By our third year, I had stopped asking out loud, but I had not stopped wondering. I began to notice things the way a woman notices things when she has learned to not trust the answer she's given. Kelechi took certain phone calls in the bathroom with the tap running, as if the sound of water could hide a voice. Once, I saw a name flash on his screen, Mama, and by the time I asked who it was, he had already declined the call and told me it was network issues, even though the phone clearly showed a missed call, not a failed one. Once I found a worn photograph tucked inside an old textbook of his, half hidden between the pages like a leaf pressed there years ago and forgotten. It showed a much younger Kelechi standing beside a woman who could only be his mother and two boys who must have been his brothers, all of them in front of a large compound with a red gate. Everyone in the photograph was smiling, except for one figure at the very edge of the frame, partially cut off, a woman in white, standing slightly apart from the family, her face turned away from the camera as if she did not want to be seen. When I asked Kelechi about the photograph, he took it from my hand so fast I nearly caught my finger on the edge, and he would not tell me who the woman in white was. "Just an auntie," he said. "She's not important." Nothing about how he said it sounded like she was not important.
There was one more incident months before Emeka was born that I had almost forgotten until everything else forced me to remember it. A woman called Kelechi's phone one evening while he was in the shower, and because I was folding his clothes and the phone kept buzzing insistently on the bed, I answered it, thinking it might be work. A voice on the other end, older, careful, asked, "Is this Kelechi's line?" When I said yes and told her I was his wife, there was a long silence, the kind of silence that carries more information than words would have. "Please," the woman finally said, "tell him his mother is asking of him." And then the line went dead before I could ask her name. When Kelechi came out of the bathroom and I told him about the call, his face lost color so completely that I thought he might faint. He told me it was a wrong number, that I should not worry about it, and then he changed his phone line entirely within the same week. I did not know it then, but that woman had likely been Uncle Ikena's wife, one of the very few people trusted with the truth, reaching out on behalf of a mother who, even while performing grief for a dead son, still could not stop herself from quietly checking whether he was alive and well. Please, before I go further, If this story is already pulling at something in you, tap that subscribe button, because I promise you, what I found out about Kelechi's family was not what any of us expected. Not me, not you, not even the people who thought they already knew the full story. By our 4th year of marriage, I had given birth to our son, Chiamaka, and it was after Emeka was born that the real cracks began to show, because a child changes a woman's patience. I was no longer willing to raise a boy who would grow up not knowing his grandmother's face, his father's brothers, the compound his blood came from. I told Kelechi plainly one Sunday afternoon while Emeka slept between us on the bed, I am not doing this anymore. Either you take me and your son to see your family, or you tell me the real reason why you refuse. He looked at me for a long time. Something in his eyes shifted. Not anger, but something closer to exhaustion, like a man who has been carrying a heavy bag for years and has finally reached the point where his arms are shaking. You don't understand what you're asking, he said quietly. Then help me understand, I said, because right now, all I understand is that my husband is ashamed of me or ashamed of his own family, and I don't know which one is worse. It's not you, he said, sitting up. It was never you. Chiamaka, if I take you there, things will come out that I have spent years trying to keep buried, and once they come out, I don't know what happens to us. That sentence should have frightened me more than it did. Instead, strangely, it gave me hope, because for the first time in 4 years, my husband was admitting there was something to know. A locked door is easier to accept than a man swearing there is no door at all. I would rather know and struggle with it than keep living inside a marriage with a wall in the middle of it that I am not allowed to touch. He did not answer me that night, but 3 weeks later, on a Friday evening, he came home from work, sat me down at our dining table and said, "We're going to Amudo this weekend. I need you to prepare yourself because what you're about to walk into is not a simple family. And when we get there, please, whatever you hear, whatever anyone says to you, let me explain it to you myself afterward. Don't judge me in front of them." I agreed, because what else does a woman do when the door she has been begging to open finally creaks forward? She walks through it even when something inside her is whispering to be careful. That week, before we traveled, I barely slept. I lay awake beside Kelechi each night, listening to his breathing, trying to guess from the rhythm of it whether he was truly asleep or only pretending, the way I was pretending. I packed and unpacked Emeka's bag 3 times, unsure what a child needs when he is about to meet a grandmother who does not know he exists. I called my late mother's younger sister, Auntie Mfeinwa, the closest thing I had left to a mother, and told her everything. The funeral, the missing family, the woman in white in the photograph. She was quiet for a long moment on the phone before she said, "Chiamaka, whatever you find there, remember that a man's past is not a man's character. Go and see, then decide." I held on to those words the entire drive to Amudo, repeating them to myself like a rosary, because I sensed, even before I understood why, that I would need them. The journey to Amudo took almost 8 hours from Lagos, the last 2 on a red, dust-choked road that swallowed our car in clouds every time another vehicle passed. Emeka slept most of the way, his small head resting against my arm, and Kelechi barely spoke, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed ahead like a man driving towards a courtroom rather than his childhood home. When we finally turned into the compound with the red gate, the same gate from the photograph, though the paint had faded now, my chest was pounding so hard I thought Emeka would wake from the sound of it. A woman came out to the veranda first. She was older, wrapped in faded wrapper, her back slightly bent, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing, sweeping over me and over the child in my arms before they landed on Kelechi and stayed there hard and unreadable. "So," she said in Igbo, "so the dead man has finally decided to come home."
I turned to Kelechi, certain I had misfed her, certain the dust and the heat and the exhaustion of the journey had confused my ears. But Kelechi's face had gone completely still, the way a man's face goes still right before he breaks. Mama, please, not like this, not in front of my wife. The dead man. I looked at my husband, flesh, breath, heartbeat, standing right there beside me, holding our son's small bag. And I understood in that moment that whatever I had imagined during 4 years of locked doors and half answers had not prepared me for even 1% of what I was about to learn. If you are still here with me, drop a comment telling me where you think this story is going, because I promise you, you are not going to guess it. And please subscribe, because the middle of this story is where everything cracks open. The compound itself told its own story before anyone spoke a word. The red gate, once bright, had faded to a dull rust color, its hinges groaning as Obinna pushed it open for the car. Chickens scattered from under a mango tree at the sound of our engine. Neighbors on either side of the compound wall paused what they were doing to stare, unashamed, at the foreign car and the foreign woman stepping out of it, holding a sleeping child. Because in a village that size, a stranger's arrival is never a small event, and I would soon learn that a stranger arriving with Kelechi Nwosu was the largest event Amudo had seen in over a decade. We were led inside, not embraced, not welcomed the way I had imagined a homecoming should feel. Kelechi's mother, whose name I would later learn was Mama Ngozi, sat us down in a dim parlor with faded photographs on the wall and a single ceiling fan turning too slowly to do anything against the heat. 2 men entered soon after, Kelechi's younger brothers, Obinna and Chidi, both of them staring at Kelechi the way one stares at a ghost who has walked in wearing familiar clothes.
"You have a child," Obinna said, not to Kelechi, but almost to himself, staring at Emeka. "You built a whole life somewhere else." "I had to," Kelechi said. "You know why I had to." "Do I?" Obinna's voice cracked. "Because from where I was standing, my elder brother simply disappeared one morning, and 3 days later, this same family was standing over an empty grave, burying a coffin with stones inside it, because his own mother told everyone that Kelechi Nwosu had died in a motor accident on his way back from Owerri." The room tilted around me. I looked at Kelechi, at my husband, the man I had married, the father of my son, and I asked him the only question that made sense in that moment. "You have a grave? There is a grave here with your name on it, and you have never told me?" Kelechi did not answer immediately. It was Mama Ngozi who spoke instead, her voice flat, worn thin by years of carrying whatever this secret was. Chidi, the younger of the 2 brothers, who had said almost nothing since we arrived, finally spoke, his voice tight with a heart that seemed to have been rehearsed in private for years and never once spoken aloud. "Do you know what it did to us?" he asked Kelechi. "I was 15 when they told me my brother was dead. I stopped eating for 2 weeks. I fought a boy at school because he made a joke about how our family kept losing men. I carried your name on my chest like a stone for 11 years, Kelechi, and you were in Lagos drinking chilled malt and building a family, while I was here carrying you like a corpse in my own head." Kelechi did not defend himself. He simply lowered his head and let his brother's words land, because there was nothing in that room that could soften what Chidi had just said, and pretending otherwise would only have made it worse. "Come," Mama Ngozi said, her voice suddenly heavier than before, as though Chidi's outburst had used up whatever composure she had been holding on to. "Since you have brought this woman and this child into my house, since my son has decided today is the day for truth, then let truth be told completely or not at all." She led us out through the back of the compound, past a small kitchen with soot-blackened walls, into a narrow part of land shaded by an old udara tree. And there, beneath that tree, was a grave, a real cemented grave with a name carved into a small stone marker, Kelechi Chukwuemeka Nwosu. A date of birth, a date of death, 11 years in the past. My husband's name on a tombstone while my husband stood beside me, alive, his hand trembling slightly at his side. "Explain it to her," Mama Ngozi said to Kelechi, not looking at him, looking instead at the grave, as if she had spent 11 years having conversations with that stone that she had never had with her actual son.
Explain to your wife why there is a grave here with your name on it, and why your own mother had to bury an empty coffin and mourn a living son because you decided your life was more important than the promise your father made before he died. If you are feeling the weight of this the way I felt it standing under that Udara tree, subscribe now, because what Kelechi told me next split Kelechi's family story into two completely different truths, and I still don't know, even now, which one deserves my forgiveness more. Kelechi's father, Papa Nwusu, had been a respected man in Amudo, a herbalist and a minor chief, the kind of man whose word carried weight in council meetings and whose blessing was sought for marriages, businesses, and journeys. When Kelechi was 17, his father fell seriously ill, the kind of illness that makes a man start settling debts he has been avoiding his whole life. And one of those debts, Kelechi learned only as his father lay dying, was a promise made almost 2 decades earlier to another respected family in a neighboring village, the Eze family, that Papa Ngosu's firstborn son would marry the Eze family's firstborn daughter, a girl named Adaora, once both children came to age. It was an old-fashioned arrangement, the kind more common a generation before Kelechi's, sealed with kola nut and palm wine and the honor of 2 families, back when Papa Nwusu and Adaora's father were young men swearing loyalty to each other's bloodlines. Papa Nwusu made Kelechi swear at his bedside that he would honor this promise. Kelechi, 17 years old, terrified, watching his father's chest rise and fall for what would be one of the last times, swore. For the next several years, Kelechi tried. He visited Adaora's family, he sat through the formalities, but Kelechi did not love Adaora, and worse, he began to suspect, though he took him time to be certain, that Adaora did not love him either, that she had her own private hopes, her own private heart already given to someone else in her village, a young mechanic her family considered beneath her. Both of them were being pushed into a marriage neither of them wanted, bound by a promise made between 2 men who are no longer alive to see the cost of it. Kelechi tried to speak to his mother about breaking their engagement gently, about finding a respectful way to release both families from the old promise. But Mama Ngozi, terrified of dishonoring her late husband's word, terrified of what the community would say, refused to even discuss it. Your father's spirit is watching. If you break this, you curse this family. 3 months before the traditional wedding to Adaora was scheduled to happen, Kelechi ran. He told no one except Uncle Ikena, the one relative who understood, who helped him disappear quietly to Lagos and helped him start over under circumstances so complete that even his own brothers did not know the truth. And to protect Kelechi from the shame he had brought on the family, and to protect the family's name from a scandal that would follow them for a generation, Mama Ngozi made a decision that still haunted the compound 11 years later. She told the village that her son had died in an accident. She held a funeral. She buried an empty coffin weighted with stones. She let an entire community grieve a lie rather than let them know her son had refused an arranged marriage and disappeared. Because, in her mind, a dead son was more forgivable than a disobedient one. And Adaora, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, thinking of the woman in white at the edge of the old photograph. Mama Ngozi's face changed then, and it was Obina who answered, quietly, gently, in a voice that finally sounded less like anger and more like grief. Adaora never married the mechanic she loved. Her family would not allow it, not after the shame of Kelechi's disappearance made them a laughingstock too. She lives 2 villages from here, unmarried, taking care of her aging parents. Some people say she waited for years, thinking Kelechi would come back and make things right, before she finally understood he never would. I felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with sorrow. Sorrow for a woman I had never met, whose entire life had been quietly ruined by a promise she never made herself, by a man who ran from his cage without ever looking back to see who else was standing in it. This is the part where I need you to subscribe truly, because everything I believed about my marriage up until this point was about to be turned over one more time, because the story was not finished and the biggest twist of all was still waiting under that Udara tree. I turned to Kelechi, tears now openly on my face, and asked him the question that had been building in me since the moment his mother called him a dead man. So all these years, every time you told me your mother's health made her unable to travel, every time you said things were complicated with your brothers, you are lying to me? Not about small things, about your entire identity. I married a man the world believes is buried under this tree? I was going to tell you, Kelechi said, his voice breaking, now no longer the composed man from the wedding, no longer the careful architect of our life together. Every year I told myself, this year I will tell her. And every year, the longer I waited, the more impossible it felt, because how do you tell your wife that you let your own mother bury a coffin full of stones? That there is a whole community 2 hours from Lagos who mourned you, cried for you, poured libations for you, while you were alive, building a family with someone else? I was ashamed, Chiamaka, not of you. Never of you. I was ashamed of what I had allowed my mother to do to protect me. And I was ashamed that even after everything, I still don't know if running was the right thing or the most cowardly thing I have ever done. Mama Ngozi spoke again then, and her voice, for the first time since we arrived, softened just slightly, the hardness in it giving way to something closer to exhaustion. I have lived 11 years pretending my son is dead, she said. 11 years of people asking me how I am coping with grief, and me nodding and swallowing the truth because I was more afraid of the community's judgment than I was of my own lie. I told myself I did it to protect him, but some nights I wonder if I did it to protect myself from admitting that my husband's dying promise was cruel and that I was too weak to say so while he was alive to hear it. Here is the twist I did not see coming, the one that changed how I understood everything. I had walked into that compound believing my husband was the only one hiding something, believing that if I could just uncover his secret, I would finally have the whole truth. But standing under that Udara tree, I realized every single person in that family had been living inside their own version of the same lie. Mama Ngozi hiding her guilt behind grief she performed for a community. Obinna and Chidi hiding their anger behind a silence they mistook for loyalty to their mother. And somewhere, 2 villages away, a woman named Adaora hiding an entire stolen life behind the quiet dignity of a woman who never let anyone see how much waiting had cost her. The truth was never simply my husband refused to let me meet his family. The truth was that an entire family had built its peace on top of a lie so large it required a literal grave to hold it down, and my arrival, with our son in my arms, had finally cracked the ground open. We stayed in Amudo for 3 days. I will not pretend those 3 days were easy, because they were not. There were long silences at the dining table. There was a visit, arranged carefully, nervously by Obinna, to see Adaora, a meeting I did not expect Kelechi to survive emotionally, and one I am still not sure he has fully recovered from even now. Adaora was older than the photograph, quieter than I imagined, and when she looked at Kelechi, there was no anger in her eyes, only a tired, weary kind of peace. The peace of a woman who has already grieved everything she is going to grieve, and has nothing left to give the situation but honesty. I forgave you a long time ago, she told him, in front of me, in front of her mother. Not because you deserved it quickly, but because carrying anger for a man who was not truly mine to keep was heavier than I could carry for 11 years. I hope your wife knows what she has, even if it came to her wrapped in all of this. She turned to me then, and something about the directness of her gaze made me straighten in my seat. You are wondering if you should hate me, she said, not unkindly. You do not need to. I did not lose a husband. I lost the idea of one before the wedding even happened, and there is a mercy in losing an idea instead of a man you have already learned to love. What your husband took from me was time and disappointment, and yes, some years I cannot get back, but he did not take my whole life because I refused to let him. I built a life anyway, smaller than I once imagined, but mine. Her honesty humbled me in a way I had not expected. I had walked into that meeting braced to comfort a broken woman, and instead I left it having been taught something about dignity by one. I did not know in that moment whether to resent Adaora for the years my husband had cost her, or to admire her for a grace I am not certain I would have found in her position. Maybe both feelings can live in the same heart. I have learned since then that most difficult truths require room for 2 feelings at once. On our second night in Amudo, unable to sleep in the small guest room with its narrow bed and its single kerosene lamp, I stepped outside and found Obinna alone sitting on an upturned bucket near the kitchen, staring at nothing. I sat beside him without asking permission, the way you sometimes can with a person once a family has already broken open in front of you and there is no formality left to protect. Obinna admitted quietly, not looking at me. I used to hate him, he said, not just for leaving me here to become the man of this house at 19, to sit in council meetings in his place, to answer for a family name he abandoned. I told myself if I ever saw him again, I would not even speak to him. He paused, turning a small stone over in his fingers. But watching him with your son today, the way he carried him on his shoulders past the cassava farm, I kept thinking, this is the brother I remember before everything. Maybe hate is easier to carry when the person is actually dead. It is harder to hate a man who is standing in front of you, apologizing with his whole body. I did not have an answer for him. I simply sat there in the dark, letting the crickets fill the silence, understanding that Obinna's grief and my own confusion were in that moment two different rivers running towards the same sea. The following morning, Mama Ngozi asked me to walk with her to the stream, just the two of us, without Kelechi. I agreed, uncertain what to expect, my heart tightening the entire walk down the narrow bush path. At the stream, as she filled her clay pot with water the way she must have done 10,000 times in her life, she finally spoke to me directly, woman to woman, without her son standing between us. I am not going to ask you to forgive me, she said. That is not mine to ask. But I will tell you this. I have watched my son on this visit more closely than I have watched him in 11 years, and I see how his eyes follow you and that boy. Whatever fear made him run from Adaora, I do not see that fear in him when he looks at you. Hold on to that, even on the days when everything else about this family feels too heavy to carry. It was the closest thing to a blessing she had given me since we arrived, and I carried it back to the compound folded carefully inside my chest, the way one carries something fragile across uneven ground. Before we left Amudo, Mama Ngozi did something I will remember for the rest of my life. She walked to the grave under the Udara tree, knelt beside it, and told the small cloud of family that had gathered, because word travels fast in a village, and by our third day half of Amudo somehow knew that the dead man had returned, she told them the truth. All of it, the broken engagement, the empty coffin, the 11 years of performed grief. It cost her something visible to say it out loud, a kind of public unraveling I don't think many people would have the courage to survive. But she did it anyway, standing over the grave of a son who was not in it, finally letting the ground and the lie both settle. If you have made it this far in this story, I want you to subscribe, not because the story needs it, but because I think some of you are carrying your own version of a grave with stones inside it, a truth you have buried because you thought protecting someone meant lying to them, when really the protection you gave them was smaller than the distance the lie put between you. We went back to Lagos changed. Kelechi is not the same man who married me, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Something in him loosened after Amudo, the way a fist finally opens after being clenched for years. He calls his mother now, real calls, not the bathroom tap kind, calls where I can hear him laughing at something she said, calls that sometimes run so long dinner gets cold before he remembers to come to the table. He and his brothers are rebuilding.
Something slow and careful. The way you rebuild a bridge that has been standing broken for over a decade. You do not rush it. You test each plank before you trust your weight to it. The first time Chidi visited us in Lagos, 6 months after our trip to Amudo, I watched him stand in our small parlor, looking around at the life his brother had built without him. The photographs on the wall, the child's toys scattered across the rug, the small, ordinary evidence of an ordinary family. And I saw something crumple in his face before he composed himself again. Later that night, after Emeka had been to bed, I found the two brothers sitting on our balcony, sharing a bottle of stout, talking in low voices about nothing important, about football, about their late father's old habits, about the kind of small things brothers are supposed to talk about. The kind of small things 11 years had stolen from both of them.
I stood in the doorway watching them for a while before I went inside, understanding that some healing does not need witnesses, that some conversations belong only to the people repairing them. It has not all been smooth. There are still nights when Kelechi grows distant without warning, when I catch him staring at nothing, and I know without asking that his mind has wandered back to that grave under the Adaora tree. There are still moments when I feel a flash of anger so sharp it frightens me, when I remember that I spent 4 years of my marriage being lied to by a man I trusted with my whole life, and I have had to learn, slowly, painfully, that forgiveness is not a single decision made once under a tree in Imo State. It is a decision you make again and again, some days easily, some days through gritted teeth, until eventually it becomes less of a decision and more of a habit. We have not removed the tombstone under the Adaora tree. Mama Ngozi asked to leave it there, strangely, as a reminder, she said, of the version of her son the family lost when fear made the decisions instead of honesty. Kelechi visited sometimes when we go back to the village, standing over his own grave the way another man might visit the grave of someone he used to be. As for Adaora, she and Kelechi's family remained close in a way that surprised me, though it should not have. She was never truly the enemy in this story. She was another casualty of 2 dying men's pride, another woman whose life was rearranged by a promise she never made. Last I heard, she had finally begun seeing the mechanic her family once forbade, quietly, patiently, on her own terms this time, with no father's deathbed promise standing between them. People ask me sometimes if I regret pushing Kelechi to take me to Amudo, if I wish I had simply accepted his silence and let the past stay buried the way her mother buried that coffin. I tell them no, every time, without hesitation, because a marriage cannot survive on a grave neither of you are honest about. I would rather know the full weight of what my husband carried than to spend the rest of my life loving only the parts of him he thought was safe enough to show me. Sometimes, when Emeka is older, curious the way children eventually become about their history, he will ask me about his grandmother's compound, about the red gate, about the strange stone under the Adaora tree with his father's name carved into it. I have already decided what I will tell him. I will tell him the truth, all of it, the same way his grandmother finally found the courage to speak it aloud in front of the village. I will tell him that his father was once a frightened boy who made a frightened choice, and that fear, left alone in the dark for too many years, can grow into something that looks like betrayal even when it began as something closer to survival. I will tell him that his grandmother loved her son so fiercely that her love became a lie, and that love too can hurt the very people it is trying to protect when it forgets to include honesty. And I will tell him that the reason he has cousins who spoil him and uncles who argue over who gets to carry him first whenever we visit, and a grandmother who now calls every single Sunday without fail, is because 2 grown women, his grandmother and a woman named Adaora who is not related to him by blood, but who loved his family enough to forgive it, both decided on 2 separate days, under 2 different kinds of pressure, that the truth, however late, was worth more than the comfort of silence. I think about that photograph often, the one I found tucked inside Kelechi's old textbook all those years ago, the one with the woman in white standing at the edge of the frame, turned away from the camera. I understand her now. That instinct to turn from the lens, to not want to be captured inside a moment that was already beginning to hurt her. I have thought more than once about asking Kelechi if he still has that photograph somewhere, tucked into another book, another drawer, another hiding place. I have not asked. Some things I have learned do not need to be found twice. It is enough that they were finally, fully seen once. If this story moved something in you, subscribe to this channel because there are more stories like this one waiting. Stories about the doors families keep closed and what happens to the people brave enough or desperate enough to finally push them open. Thank you for staying with me till the end. I will see you in the next story.